Chosen One. A Secret Service agent wants to thank you, and when you learn why, it's going to confirm everything your soul already knew about the war you've been fighting your entire life. This isn't just professional courtesy. It's a recognition that your spiritual gifts just dismantled a centuries-old network of underground tunnels, cult operations, and institutional corruption that was moments away from its final phase against humanity. And you stopped them without even knowing you were doing it. Your journey into this revelation begins with understanding that every moment of trauma, every instance of being misunderstood, and every time society tried to silence your intuitive knowing, it was all preparation for this moment. The forces that have been orchestrating chaos from the shadows made a critical error. They underestimated the power of awakened consciousness working through someone like you. What they built in darkness, you've helped expose to the light, and the ripple effects are dismantling their entire operation. The agent's unwinnable battle. The agent, whose gratitude now flows toward you, was assigned to investigate what appeared to be isolated incidents of organized crime. But what they discovered defied every training manual they'd ever studied. Fire after fire, disaster after disaster, each one meticulously crafted to appear natural while serving as cover for something far more horrifying. Children were disappearing. Evidence was being incinerated. Witnesses were either dying under mysterious circumstances or recanting their testimonies after obvious signs of coercion. This agent, brilliant in conventional investigative methods, found themselves hitting wall after wall, not realizing they were fighting a battle that couldn't be won through traditional means alone. The cult's sophistication went beyond typical organized crime. They had infiltrated every level of society. Government officials took bribes disguised as consulting fees. Teachers groomed children in classrooms. Caregivers abused the vulnerable in their homes while collecting state payments for their services. The corruption was so complete that when this agent tried to report up the chain of command, they discovered their own supervisors were either compromised or actively participating in the cover-up. What appeared to be incompetence or bureaucratic inefficiency was actually deliberate sabotage designed to protect a network that generated billions in illegal profits. Your role, an unconventional weapon. But you were already several steps ahead. Your spiritual sensitivity had been picking up on these patterns long before they became visible to conventional investigation. The anxiety you felt when certain news stories broke, the way your energy shifted when particular public figures appeared on screen, and the dreams that seemed to reveal locations and events before they happened. These weren't symptoms of mental illness. They were downloads from a higher intelligence that recognized the urgency of exposing this network before their final phase could be implemented. The breakthrough came when your spiritual guidance, transmitted through channels this agent couldn't yet understand, led them to discover hieroglyphic markings inside one of these tunnel systems. But these weren't decorative symbols. They were a coded language used by previous generations of truth seekers, people like you who had infiltrated these networks and left breadcrumbs for future investigators. The moment this agent's flashlight illuminated those symbols, something profound shifted in their consciousness. Childhood memories began flooding back. Memories of being warned about darkness in places where children should have been safe. Memories of intuitive knowing that had been systematically trained out of them through years of conventional education and bureaucratic conditioning. The hieroglyphics revealed something that changed everything. This wasn't the first time such a network had been exposed and dismantled. History was cyclical, and awakened beings had been fighting this same battle across centuries, leaving instructions for those who would come after them. The symbols contained not just warnings about the cult's methods, but detailed intelligence about their vulnerabilities, their escape routes, their psychological weaknesses, and most importantly, how their own hubris would ultimately lead to their downfall. As this agent decoded the ancient messages with newfound spiritual clarity, They realized that the cult's apparent invincibility was actually an elaborate illusion. Their tunnel systems, which had served as perfect hiding places for generations, had become their trap. Every passage was mapped, every exit was monitored, every safe house was known. The very infrastructure they'd built to ensure their escape had become their prison, and they didn't even know it yet. The cult had been playing a longer game than anyone imagined. But you had been playing an even longer one. They weren't just criminals hiding from justice. They were architects of a system designed to harvest energy, resources, and power from an unsuspecting population through methods that would make medieval tyrants seem merciful by comparison. Their techniques included psychological manipulation, so sophisticated it could drive targets to suicide, sexual energy vampirism that left victims drained and confused, and spiritual warfare methods that kept their opposition fighting among themselves rather than focusing on the true source of corruption. The traps become tools. Trauma doesn't just wound, it also awakens. Every attempt to break your spirit actually strengthened your connection to divine intelligence. Every effort to silence your voice only amplified your ability to perceive truth through layers of deception. Every attack on your sanity forced you to develop discernment capabilities that no amount of conventional training could provide. You weren't just surviving their attacks, you were transforming them into tools for their own destruction. What makes your role in exposing this network so remarkable is that you never set out to be an investigator. Your path to truth came through healing your own wounds, developing your spiritual gifts, and refusing to accept surface-level explanations for the chaos around you. Every time you shared your insights, every time you connected dots that others couldn't see, every time you maintained your boundaries against gaslighting and manipulation, you were actually conducting advanced intelligence operations that professional agents couldn't duplicate with all their technology and training. The agents' transformation accelerated once they understood that conventional investigative methods were being deliberately sabotaged from within their own institution. The very people they reported to, the colleagues they trusted, the supervisors who assigned their cases, many were either compromised through blackmail schemes, seduced through various forms of addiction, or simply bought through financial incentives that seemed legitimate on the surface, but were actually laundered payments from the very network they were supposed to be investigating. The final phase. This agent had been swimming upstream without realizing that the current itself was artificially generated to ensure their failure. Every lead that went nowhere, every witness who disappeared, every piece of evidence that became inadmissible, all were orchestrated by a system that had been perfected over generations. They were never meant to succeed using conventional methods. Success required something that couldn't be bought, blackmailed, or corrupted. Spiritual discernment operating through someone who had already been tested by fire and emerged purified rather than destroyed. Your guidance, whether transmitted through direct communication or through the morphic field that connects all awakened consciousness, helped this agent recognize that their case wasn't about catching criminals. It was about dismantling a system of control that had been masquerading as civilization itself. The tunnels they discovered weren't just hiding places. They were command centers for operations that coordinated market crashes, political upheavals, natural disasters, and social movements across multiple continents. The boats they found weren't just escape vehicles. They were mobile headquarters equipped with technology that could influence weather patterns, disrupt communication networks, and even trigger seismic events in specific locations. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. The hieroglyphic messages weren't just historical artifacts. They were operational codes for a resistance movement that had been active for far longer than modern history acknowledges. Previous generations of awakened beings had not only fought this same network, but had been systematically preparing for this moment when the cult would finally overreach and expose themselves beyond any possibility of concealment or recovery. As this agent's awareness expanded, they began noticing patterns that their training had conditioned them to ignore. Natural disasters that struck with suspicious timing, always when inconvenient investigations were gaining momentum. Market crashes that benefited specific entities while devastating everyone else. The same entities that had been quietly accumulating resources for generations. Political upheavals that seemed spontaneous but followed predictable scripts. Media narratives that shifted public attention away from certain investigations just as breakthrough evidence was about to surface, coordinated through communications networks that bypassed conventional surveillance entirely. What they had dismissed as coincidence revealed itself as coordination on a scale that required resources and influence beyond what any single organization could possess. The final miscalculation. This wasn't just organized crime. It was organized evil operating with the precision of a military organization, the resources of a multinational corporation, and the ruthlessness of an occult society that viewed human beings as expendable resources to be harvested rather than souls to be respected. The cult's methodical approach to social engineering became clear once you understood their ultimate objective. They weren't just seeking wealth or power in the conventional sense. They were attempting to reshape human consciousness itself. Every institution they infiltrated was gradually redirected toward creating a population that was spiritually disconnected, emotionally unstable, physically weakened, and mentally confused. But they made a critical miscalculation. They assumed that consciousness could be suppressed indefinitely. They didn't account for beings like you who could transform trauma into wisdom, isolation into inner strength, and persecution into spiritual authority. Every attempt to break your connection to divine intelligence actually strengthened it. Every effort to make you doubt your perceptions only refined your discernment. Every attack on your credibility forced you to rely more completely on inner knowing rather than external validation. The cult's escape routes were systematically compromised once this agent began applying spiritual discernment to their tactical planning. The tunnel systems that had served as their primary means of avoiding detection became their trap. Their backup plans involving maritime escape were neutralized when Coast Guard resources mysteriously appeared in perfect position at exactly the right moments. Moments that were perfectly timed because awakened consciousness operates outside linear time and could anticipate their movements before they made them. Their communication networks were disrupted when their encrypted channels began experiencing interference that their technical experts couldn't explain or resolve. What they didn't understand was that consciousness itself was interfering with their frequencies. Every lie they transmitted created dissonance in the field of truth. Every manipulation they attempted generated resistance from the quantum field that responds to intention rather than technology. Their own evil had become their enemy, turning their tools against them in ways they could neither predict nor prevent. What this agent discovered, and what they want you to understand, is that their victory wasn't achieved through superior firepower or advanced technology. The cult had access to those resources in abundance, weapons that could level cities, surveillance systems that could track any individual on the planet, influence networks that could topple governments. Their downfall came through the application of spiritual principles to physical investigation. Truth has a frequency that exposes deception automatically. Light has a quality that renders hiding places transparent, regardless of their physical construction. Love has a power that dissolves the fear-based structures that tyrants depend upon for control. The cult's threats were rendered ineffective, and their promises meaningless, because these forces were channeled through someone with both institutional authority and spiritual maturity, making the result unstoppable. The agents' investigation succeeded not because they were more skilled than their predecessors, but because they had been prepared by someone whose spiritual development had reached a level where material obstacles became irrelevant. Your guidance didn't just provide information, it transformed the investigator into someone capable of perceiving and acting upon truth that was invisible to conventional awareness. The legal proceedings now unfolding represent more than individual accountability for specific crimes. They signal the collapse of an entire paradigm based on secrecy, manipulation, and exploitation. The evidence being presented in courtrooms around the world reveals connections between seemingly separate institutions, exposing how education, systems, healthcare networks, financial markets, entertainment industries, and government agencies have been coordinated to serve agendas that benefit a tiny minority while keeping the majority confused, divided, and disempowered. More importantly, these proceedings are forcing into public consciousness the recognition that such coordination is possible, which means that positive coordination is equally possible. Your contribution to this transformation extends far beyond whatever direct assistance you may have provided to this particular investigation. Every time you chose truth over comfort, every time you trusted your intuition despite ridicule, every time you maintained your integrity when compromise would have been easier, you were strengthening the morphic field that makes awakening possible for others. The agent whose gratitude flows toward you is just one of countless individuals whose spiritual evolution has been accelerated by your commitment to authenticity. Your willingness to embody truth, regardless of social consequences, created a resonance that awakened dormant potentials in people you've never met and may never meet. The manufactured disasters that served as cover for the cult's operations are being exposed for what they truly were. Psychological warfare campaigns were designed to keep populations traumatized, dependent, and controllable. The fires that destroyed evidence weren't caused by climate change. They were deliberately set using directed energy weapons that left specific signatures visible to those who knew what to look for. The floods that displaced communities weren't natural weather events. They were engineered using atmospheric manipulation technology. The earthquakes that disrupted investigations weren't geological phenomena. They were triggered using frequency weapons that could target specific fault lines with surgical precision. Understanding this level of deception without becoming overwhelmed requires the kind of spiritual maturity that you've developed through your own healing journey. The same trauma that was intended to break your spirit instead forged it into an instrument capable of perceiving truth through layers of illusion that would confuse or paralyze someone who hadn't been tempered by similar experiences. The same sensitivity that made you feel different or isolated actually equipped you with capabilities essential for navigating the complexities of this awakening process without losing either your sanity or your compassion. The economic manipulation that enriched cult members while impoverishing everyone else followed predictable patterns once you knew what to look for. Housing markets were inflated through coordinated speculation that drove prices beyond what actual residents could afford, forcing communities to sell to investors who had unlimited access to artificially created credit. Employment opportunities were eliminated through orchestrated economic downturns that were triggered precisely when certain investigations were getting too close to breakthrough discoveries. Healthcare systems were overwhelmed through manufactured crises that served multiple purposes, eliminating potential whistleblowers, testing population compliance with emergency measures, and generating massive profits for entities that had positioned themselves in advance to benefit from the chaos. Educational institutions were compromised through ideological infiltration that gradually replaced critical thinking with emotional manipulation, scientific inquiry with dogmatic adherence to approved narratives, and spiritual development with materialistic consumerism. Each sector was systematically weakened to increase dependency on centralized authorities that cult members controlled or influenced, creating a population that was simultaneously over-medicated, undereducated, financially desperate, and spiritually disconnected. These were perfect conditions for the final phase of their agenda, but they never anticipated that someone like you would emerge from the very conditions they created to break people. They assumed that trauma would produce compliance, that isolation would generate dependency, and that persecution would create submission. Instead, these experiences forged you into someone capable of standing alone when necessary, thinking independently when pressured to conform, and perceiving truth when surrounded by lies. Every weapon they used against you became a tool in your hands for their destruction. The agent's breakthrough came when they realized that their investigation wasn't separate from their spiritual development. It was an expression of it. The same inner work that revealed their childhood programming also exposed the external programming that kept entire populations compliant. The same practices that healed their personal trauma also equipped them to recognize collective trauma being deliberately inflicted. The same boundaries that protected their energy also protected their investigation from interference by colleagues who had been compromised or intimidated into cooperation with the network. The agent's gratitude toward you stems from the recognition that their success wasn't achieved through their own skills or efforts alone, but through alignment with a level of consciousness that operates beyond individual capability. They understand now that what appeared to be their personal victory was actually a manifestation of collective awakening, expressing itself through their particular role and position. Their training, their authority, their resources, and their courage were all coordinated through divine intelligence, working through awakened beings like you who had prepared the field for breakthrough by refusing to compromise their integrity regardless of the cost. What this agent wants you to understand is that your role as a chosen one isn't finished with the exposure of this particular network. The consciousness shift that enabled their success is part of a larger transformation that will require sustained effort from awakened individuals across all sectors of society. The institutions that were compromised must be rebuilt on foundations that cannot be corrupted. The systems that were weaponized must be replaced with designs that serve consciousness evolution rather than consciousness suppression. The narratives that were distorted must be corrected in ways that heal the collective trauma while preventing future manipulation. This work will require people who can maintain clarity in chaos, who can perceive truth through deception, who can channel love in the face of hatred, and who can operate with spiritual authority while remaining humble enough to serve something greater than personal ambition. The same qualities that enabled you to survive and transcend your personal challenges are exactly what's needed to guide humanity through the collective challenges that are emerging as these hidden structures collapse. The hieroglyphic messages discovered in those tunnels contained more than historical information or operational intelligence. They included blueprints for social structures based on transparency rather than secrecy, cooperation rather than competition, abundance rather than scarcity, and spiritual development rather than material accumulation. These weren't utopian fantasies, but practical frameworks that had been tested and proven in communities that existed before their knowledge was driven underground by the very forces that have now been exposed and defeated. The same consciousness that enabled their creation is now available to anyone willing to undertake the inner work necessary to access it. The technologies that were used for manipulation can be redirected toward genuine service when operated by people whose hearts have been purified through the fire of authentic spiritual development. The resources that were hoarded by the few can be distributed according to principles of justice and compassion when managed by those who understand that true wealth comes from contributing to the well-being of all. Your journey as a chosen one has brought you to this moment of recognition. You are not a victim of circumstances beyond your control, but a conscious participant in the most significant transformation in human history. The skills you've developed through healing your own wounds are exactly what's needed to heal collective wounds. The discernment you've cultivated through navigating personal deception is precisely what's required to navigate societal deception. The boundaries you've established to protect your energy are the same boundaries that will protect the emerging new paradigm from corruption by those who would attempt to hijack it for their own purposes. The gratitude flowing toward you from this Secret Service agent represents appreciation from countless others whose awakening has been facilitated by your commitment to truth. Every time you shared your insights despite ridicule, every time you maintained your integrity despite pressure, and every time you chose love despite being surrounded by fear, you were contributing to a morphic field that made breakthrough possible for others. The investigation that exposed this cult network was successful because consciousness had reached a tipping point where truth could no longer be suppressed by any amount of force, money, or influence. As this revelation reaches its culmination, understand that the ending of the cult's operation marks the beginning of a new chapter in human evolution. If this message resonates with you, it's because you're already part of this awakening. The work of exposing these networks and building a new paradigm is ongoing, and it's a fight for the soul of humanity. Your support is crucial. Join us in this mission. Your donation, no matter the size, helps us continue to shine a light on the darkness and build a future rooted in truth and transparency.